I still remember the moment I stepped inside that building, and the air was colder than the night outside, as if the walls themselves were breathing. What I saw and heard in there has never left me. It all started with a dare, the kind of stupid late-night idea you agree to only because you, Dan T., want to look like the coward in front of your friends. There was an abandoned hospital on the edge of town, a place we'd all driven past countless times but never had the nerve to enter. People told stories about it, how it burned decades ago, how patients never made it out, how at night you could still hear them screaming in the halls. Most of it was probably urban legend, but the building was real enough, looming on the horizon like a corpse of brick and stone. That Friday night, we finally decided to go in, parked 2 streets away and walked in silence, the crunch of gravel under our sneakers the only sound between us. As the hospital came into view, I felt a strange pull-in, uneasy mixture of dread and fascination. From a distance, the building looked skeletal. Its windows were black holes, its roof partially caved in, the front sign so weathered that you couldn't read the name anymore. The closer we got, the heavier the air seemed to feel. Not just colder, but thick, as though the atmosphere itself was warning us to turn around. None of us said it out loud, but I think we all felt it. The front doors were chained shut, but someone had already pried open a side entrance. Bent metal and splintered wood hung loosely, and it felt like squeezing through the ribs of something that didn't want us inside. The first step into the building was like crossing into another world. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, revealing a long corridor that seemed to stretch forever. Paint peeled from the walls in curling strips, the color long since faded into something sickly and gray. Broken glass littered the floor, and with each step, our shoes crunched loud enough to make us flinch. The smell was the worst part. A mix of mold, damp rot, and something sharper like chemicals left behind to sour with time. I covered my nose with my sleeve, but it didn't help. It was the kind of smell that clings to your lungs, making every breath feel heavy. We decided to split up. 2 of us exploring the ground floor to heading upstairs. I went with Darren down the main hallway. He was the joker of the group, always cracking dumb comments. And at first, he tried to make light of it too. He pointed his flashlight into empty rooms, pretending to see something, laughing nervously at his own jokes. But as we went deeper, his voice grew quieter. The atmosphere swallowed humor whole. We passed patient rooms, most empty except for rotting bed frames. One still had restraints dangling from its sides, swaying slightly in the draft. I shivered and kept moving. That's when we heard it. A sound from the far end of the hall, first faint, then clearer. A steady creaking, like a swing moving back and forth. But there was no wind inside, no reason anything should move on its own. Darren tried to brush it off, probably just a loose pipe or something, but even his voice lacked conviction. We moved forward, every step slower than the last. The creaking grew louder, closer, until my flashlight caught movement inside a doorway up ahead. It was a gurney, standing crooked, rocking slightly on uneven wheels. My light flickered across it, and for just a second, I thought I saw something standing beside it, a tall. Ida tilted, unnaturally to one side. My heart stuttered. I blinked and it was gone. The gurney stood still, as if it had never moved. We exchanged a glance, both of us pale, but neither willing to admit what we'd seen. "Let's go upstairs," Darren muttered. His voice was shaky, but it gave me something to focus on besides the pounding in my chest. We turned to leave onto that S, when I noticed the hallway behind us didn't look the same anymore. The doorways we'd passed seemed out of place, like the layout had shifted. My stomach sank. Maybe it was my nerves, maybe just the tricks of a decaying building. But in that moment, I felt something else entirely. It's not just unease, but a realization that we weren't alone. We hurried back toward the staircase, each step echoing far louder than it should have. The silence of the hospital pressed against my ears, thick and suffocating, until even Darren stopped trying to speak. When we reached the base of the stairs, I swear I heard something behind us, a dragging sound, slow and deliberate. I turned my light, but the hallway was empty. Still, my instincts screamed at me. We were being followed, and somehow I knew the hospital didn't want us to leave. I stood frozen at the top of the stairwell. my flashlight beam trembling across the hallway below. The sound I thought I'd heard, those faint, deliberate footsteps, seemed to have vanished into silence. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of rot and dust. My pulse hammered in my ears so loudly I wondered if I had only imagined the noise, that maybe fear itself was tricking my senses. But then, somewhere deeper in the building, I caught the faint scrape of metal against concrete. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Someone or something was down there with me. I forced myself to breathe slowly, convincing myself to keep moving. My rational brain tried to make excuses. Maybe another explorer had slipped inside. Maybe a raccoon had knocked over a pipe. But deep down, I already knew those explanations didn't sit right. The sound carried a strange weight, like it came from something intentional. I descended the stairs cautiously, the boards groaning under my weight. At the bottom, I swept the beam of light across the long corridor. Graffiti stretched across the walls, skulls, crude faces, in strange symbols that didn't look like the typical teenage scrawls. My light caught a fresh streak of something dark smeared across one doorframe. I told myself it was paint, but my stomach tightened. Each step forward felt heavier than the last. I tried to remember the layout from the research I'd done before coming here. The lower levels supposedly contained old offices, storage rooms, and a boiler area. But what really caught my attention was a locked wing mentioned in a forum thread. According to an anonymous post, security had welded the doors shut decades ago after a tragedy in that section. The details were vague, something about patients going missing, staff disappearing. I hadn't put much stock into it at the time. Now, walking deeper into the suffocating dark, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I passed a doorway that led into what must have been an old file room. Papers littered the floor, yellowed and brittle. I stooped down, brushing dust away from one folder. The words were barely legible, but I could make out a name. Beneath it, typed notes described episodes of violent hallucinations and unexplained auditory phenomena. I dropped the file quickly, suddenly repulsed. The papers seemed almost too intact, like they hadn't been sitting here for 50 years. The air grew colder as I pushed on. My breath puffed visibly in the beam of my flashlight, which flickered with a low battery warning. I smacked it against my palm until the beam steadied. That was when I heard it again, closer this time. Footsteps, slow, dragging, uneven. I ducked into a nearby room, pressing myself against the peeling wall. My heart pounded so violently that I feared it would give me away. The steps grew louder, stopping just outside the doorway. Through the crack, I aimed my flashlight at the floor. Shadow stretched across the threshold. It was tall, impossibly thin, and wavering as though it wasn't solid. I froze, not daring to breathe. The shadow lingered for what felt like minutes. Then, without a sound, it moved away down the hall. I didn't hear the steps anymore, only the distant rattle of a door somewhere deep in the building. Summoning what little courage I had, I slipped out and followed at a distance, my body trembling.
The hallway
Narrowed into a passage lined with rusted pipes. At the end stood a set of double doors, their surface charred as if fire had once licked across them. One door was ajar. Faded tape still clung to the handle. Warning, do not enter, in bold letters. I swallowed hard and stepped through. The room beyond was cavernous, maybe an old ward. Rows of bed frames lined the walls, most of them twisted and collapsed with age. Chains dangled from the ceiling, some ending in restraints that looked disturbingly human-sized. The smell here was far worse, a mix of mildew and something metallic. My flashlight darted across the room, and for a split second I thought I saw someone sitting on a bed. But when I swung the beam back, there was only emptiness. I walked further inside, forcing myself not to bolt. The deeper I went, the stronger the sense of being watched became. It wasn't just paranoia. It felt deliberate, invasive. Then my light landed on something that made my throat tighten. Against the far wall, scratched deep into the paint, were words in jagged capital letters. We never left. The letters stretched nearly the length of the wall, gouged so violently into the surface that flakes of plaster littered the floor beneath. I stood there shaking, unable to look away. Who had carved it when? And why did the grooves look so fresh? Suddenly a noise erupted from the beds. One by one, the metal frames shuddered, creaking as if invisible weight pressed against them. The sound grew louder, rattling across the entire ward. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs locked up in terror. Then came the whisper. Low, layered, and wrong. It slithered through the room, rising from every corner, though no mouth spoke it. Stay. Stay. My panic finally broke. I turned and sprinted toward the doors, my footsteps echoing against the concrete. Behind me, the whispering grew louder, overlapping until it became a grotesque chorus. The metal chains clanged wildly as though invisible hands were shaking them. I burst back into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind me. My lungs burned as I forced myself forward. Every instinct told me not to look back, but I couldn't help it. For just a moment, before the flashlight beam cut out entirely, I glimpsed movement in the dark beyond the door figures, dozens of them, pressing close as though desperate to follow. I ran blindly, my light gone, guided only by memory and the faint slivers of moonlight filtering through shattered windows. My boots splashed into stagnant puddles, and my hands scraped against rough concrete walls. Still, I could hear them, the whispers, the dragging footsteps, closing in no matter how fast I ran. I don't know how I managed to find the stairwell again. My hands scraped along the walls until I touched the cold metal railing. The whispers still echoed behind me, bouncing through the corridors like they were chasing me. I forced myself down the steps 2 at a time, nearly losing my footing more than once. At the bottom, the air was colder, heavier, like the building itself didn't want me to leave. My chest heaved and sweat trickled down my back despite the chill. Somewhere above, something heavy slammed against the floor, then again closer. It sounded like a body being dragged, or a door being torn off its hinges. I darted through the first open doorway I saw, slamming it shut behind me. My flashlight was dead, so I fumbled in my bag for a backup. When the second light clicked on, its weak beam revealed a boiler room. Rusted pipes twisted overhead like veins, dripping water onto the stained concrete floor. In the far corner, a door with a small square window caught my eye. I moved toward it slowly, my boots crunching glass. As I got closer, I realized the window wasn't empty. A face stared back at me. I staggered backward, the beam of my flashlight trembling. Face was pale, almost colorless, its eyes wide and unblinking. For a few seconds, I thought it might be a reflection, but then its lips twitched. The grin that spread across its face was too wide, stretching impossibly far. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered to the ground and rolled, its beams spinning across the floor. When I finally dared to look back at the window, the face was gone. Something slammed against the door from the other side. Once. Twice. The entire frame shook, dust drifting from the ceiling. I snatched the flashlight and bolted, forcing myself back into the hallway. My lungs screamed for air as I sprinted toward the distant glow of moonlight. Every hallway looked the same. Graffiti-covered walls, peeling paint, collapsed ceilings, kept making turns, convinced I was going in circles. The whispers returned, louder now, surrounding me. They weren't words anymore, just fragments of voices, like dozens of people speaking at once. Some cried, others laughed, some screamed in pain. Up ahead, a doorway led into what looked like a lobby. The moonlight poured in through broken glass doors. Salvation. I threw myself forward. But just as I reached the threshold, I froze. There were figures standing between me and the exit. At first I thought they were people, but as my flashlight flickered across them, I saw their faces. They were the same pale, stretched visages I'd glimpsed in the boiler room window. Empty eyes, crooked smiles. Their bodies were thin and angular, moving in jerks like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. One of them tilted its head back and let out a sound that wasn't human, a long, hollow wail that vibrated through my bones. The others joined in, their voices overlapping into a dreadful harmony. I stumbled backward, searching for another way out. That's when I noticed the staircase that wound up toward the roof. I didn't think, I just ran. My boots pounded each step, the chorus of voices following close behind. The staircase seemed endless, spiraling upward through shadow. When I finally burst through the door at the top, I was outside. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't care. I staggered to the edge of the roof and looked down. It was at least 4 stories to the ground. Couldn't jump, not without breaking something. But the figures were already emerging from the stairwell behind me. I scanned desperately, until I spotted a rusted fire escape on the side of the building. The only problem, the railing to reach it was twisted and half detached. Still, it was my only chance. I sprinted, hearing the footsteps gaining behind me, leaped onto the railing, gripping the metal so tightly my palms bled from the rust. The entire thing groaned under my weight, but I didn't stop. I climbed down rung after rung, the iron vibrating like it might tear away from the wall. Halfway down, I risked a glance upward. They were at the roof's edge now, their faces turned down toward me. Their mouths moved in perfect unison, though I couldn't hear what they were saying over the blood rushing in my ears. Then, as if commanded by one thought, they all stopped. Still, silent, watching. I didn't wait to find out what would happen next. I dropped the last 10 feet, hitting the ground hard enough to knock the wind out of me. Pain shot up my legs, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I ran across the overgrown yard, through the rusted gates, and didn't stop until the asylum was just a dark shape against the horizon. Even now, sitting safely in my room, I can still hear them. Late at night, when the world is quiet, I hear whispers leaking through the walls. Sometimes I dream of that face in the window smiling at me, waiting. And when I wake up for a split second, I swear I see it in the shadows. If you've ever thought about exploring abandoned places, take this as a warning. Some buildings don't stay empty. Some are still alive, filled with things that never left. And if you're not careful, they'll notice you. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments if you would have stayed and explored, or run the second you heard those footsteps. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more terrifying true stories, and hit the bell so you never miss a nightmare.